strangers, I hope you're all doing well today. So, as a writer, I do lots of research, particularly for my website posts. I need to be sure that what I publish is accurate. I need to fact check, and while I'm doing this, I sometimes encounter brilliant little gems that make great stories. Because I'm a writer, and being a writer is basically being a storyteller when you think about it, I really enjoy telling stories like this. Today, everything I tell you is going to be true, mostly. Picture the scene. It's December 21st, 1969. You're in Highgate Cemetery in North London. You're in the middle of a thunderstorm. You're running amongst the gravestones, trying to reach the bus stop at the far side of the cemetery, and then you see it. A grey figure lurking among the gravestones. You stop and notice something else. Something is on top of a nearby grave a few feet away from you. It's a dead animal. Cringing, you continue towards a bus stop. Then you notice something else. The dead animal has been drained of all its blood. This is the situation the residents of Highgate faced in the late 60s and early 70s. According to the newspapers and the gossip in local pubs, animals were being discovered in Highgate Cemetery, drained of their blood. No one had any explanation for these strange attacks. A few brave men tried to camp out in the cemetery, see if they could discover who or what was performing these vicious attacks. But when they awoke the next morning, they found they had no memories of the night's events. I give you a couple of seconds to work out what mythical creature is performing these attacks. Clue number 1, victims are drained of blood. And clue number 2, the human victims that survive suffer a memory loss. If you said vampires, you're correct. This is the true story of the Highgate vampire. Needless to say, the local newspapers soon caught hold of these strange events and reported that the cemetery was home to a vampire king who had been resurrected by modern-day Satanists. They warned people to avoid the area, but this of course only attracted daredevils who, when they returned from the cemetery, reported sightings of the vampire king. On March 13th, 1970, an official vampire hunt was held. Local residents patrolled the gravestones, but the Vampire King eluded them. A rivalry formed between two local priests over who could hunt and kill the Vampire King first. History has lost the name of one of these priests, but we know the identity of the other. His name was Sean Manchester. Mr. Manchester was interviewed by various news crews, wrote about his experience hunting the Highgate vampire. According to his book on the subject, he was successful in breaking into the vampire's tomb, but was persuaded by his friend not to kill the beast by stabbing it through the heart with a stake. Instead, he hung crucifixes and garlic around the tomb. Soon after this nighttime raid, the vampire attacks ceased. This is where things get really interesting. Although the attacks had stopped, all the people in London could speak about was the vampire. Then the people who had discovered the bloodless animals admitted they may have been mistaken. The animals hadn't been drained of blood, they were just dead, killed by bigger animals. The men who had memory loss in the cemetery admitted that this memory loss was due to alcohol. In other words, they were completely drunk. The two priests eventually admitted to embellishing their stories and exaggerating them, but both were adamant that the core of their story was true, and Sean Manchester in particular was adamant that he had been the one to sneak into the vampire's tomb and defeat the creature. Eventually, the two priests agreed to settle the matter over who was the best vampire hunter by having a wizard's duel in Parliament Square. I'm not even making this up, a wizard's duel. Both men arrived dressed in wizard's robes and stood on opposite sides of Parliament Square. A small news team recorded the following events. The duel began as Big Ben struck 12. The men stared at each other, and stared, and stared. So it turns out that a wizard's duel is basically a staring competition. After 3 hours, the men called it quits with no victor being declared, and they were the laughing stock of London. Sean Manchester, I believe, is still alive today. He has a few interviews on YouTube and I'm going to do some research. It's a really fascinating story. It's stories like that I love discovering and love sharing around, and I'll be talking about stories similar in future vlog videos. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this story of the Highgate Vampire. I first learned about it in my first year of uni when my friend discovered the tale, and I will see you next week. Take care.